Shalom, everybody. How y'all doing? Welcome back. Welcome back to Reading with Shiloh. What's up, baby? We're here for part 15. Part 15 of Africans in Colonial Louisiana by Miss Gwendolyn Midlo Hall. Miss Gwendolyn Midlo Hall, man. We're going to continue on in chapter 6 tonight. We're ready to continue on in chapter 6 tonight. So let's get it, man. Let's get it. Let's get it. The sea of pages that has been laid before us, man, by Miss Gwendolyn Midlo Hall. Ugh. We've been pushing right along through the book. We have been pushing right along through the book, man. There's definitely been some good points that Miss Gwendolyn has been making concerning the Haitians and some good things to tie in from the last books. Definitely some good things that we can tie together with the last book that we was reading, which was the Toussaint Louverture and the San Domingo Slave Revolution. And it talked about how they had stopped the transport and trading of the slaves from Haiti to Louisiana because of the uprising, and they mentioned that in this book that they had stopped the slave trade as well, that they had stopped bringing Haitians from the Caribbean, man. They wasn't trying to have that. There was a lot of shit going on. But they also talked about how the family structure was being kept in Louisiana more so than it was being kept in the Caribbean or the Caribbean islands. They was breaking families apart there, but here in Louisiana, they were keeping families together. And people were being sold by the whole family, like a bundle package. Got that fresh slave family on deck. Yeah, they was doing about a bundle packages. So, which was a good thing for at least, when the thought of family comes into it and keeping the families together, the nuclear family of the slaves was still held together. So those are good things, at least within the reading it is, but the concept of the slavery wasn't. So, man, I appreciate everybody that shows up. When you come on in, like, comment, subscribe, share, tell you people, man, we out here reading shit, baby. We're trying to learn some shit. We're trying to be better, trying to understand some things, build our minds up a lot better, make moves, and better ourselves. That's what I'm trying to do for sure. Put something in the chat so I can know the chat working. Shalom to everybody. But before we get to reading, man, we're going to read for about an hour. We are in chapter 6, and we're trying to mosey our way through chapter 6, which is the Creole slaves. We're trying to mosey our way to chapter 7, which is Bas de Fleuve. The Creole slaves adapt to the cypress swamp, which we'll get to that. We'll get to that one when we get to it. But like I said, we got to finish off chapter 6 first. And we're about halfway. We might be maybe a little under halfway through chapter 6. Yeah, man, we got some pages. It's probably going to be 2 sessions. Today and tomorrow. Today and tomorrow. To finish off chapter 6, man. But we got to do our workout, baby. We got to work our body, work our mind, and work our body. That's the routine that I'm trying to build. I've been working out, but I've been sucking at this reading thing lately. The weather has been terrible, so my internet has been choppy and tripping, so I haven't been reading. The garden's looking good, though. The garden is growing. I got some cucumbers on that thing. Boy, the garden's looking wonderful, thanks to the rain. And it's supposed to rain the rest of the week and until next week. So we'll see, man. I'll try to keep up and try to keep pushing as long as the weather holds, as long as we don't get, I heard Texas was getting some big ass hailstorms and it was raining. There's some flash flooding out here. The roads was impassable in some places yesterday. So, hey, but we'll keep moving. It's not raining now, so the internet is good for right now. Not storming. So we're going to push through, man. We're going to push through. Let's get our workout going so we can go ahead and read. I'm going to do 50 of these knees, 50 of these knees, and then we're going to read, man. 50 knees, and then I'm going to read. I don't even want to do the knees, but hey, it is what it is. Let's get it. Oh, Lord. 50 of these suckers. 50 with the 50. 50 with the 50. Oh. 50 with the 50. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 5, 36, 7, 38, 39, 40, 1, 42, 3, 44, 5, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50. Who 50 with the 50? 1. Let's do 25 of these. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I feel it. 14, 15, 16, 17. Shalom, everybody. What up? I'm getting to 25 and then we'll read. 17, 18, 19, 20. 5 more. Ooh. Boy, I feel it in my core. That's for damn sure. 5 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 50 with that 50. All right, let's go ahead and read now. All right. Hey, that knees. Oh, I like that knees. I felt that knees. I felt that knees where I needed to feel them knees. All right, so let's get into, once again, let's get back into chapter 6. Back into chapter 6 tonight, the Creole slaves. The full name of the chapter is Creole Slaves, Origin, Family, Language, Folklore. And we were definitely reading about family the last time. Big deal with family. All right. Pick up where we left off. Chapter 6, this is part 15 of Miss Gwendolyn MIDLO Hall's book, Africans in Colonial Louisiana. Now, some reports of domestic violence among slaves surfaced in the documents when wives were murdered. And the government was reluctant to execute slaves because it had to compensate the owners. But a capital sentence was carried out in 1723 in the case of a slave who murdered his wife. And in 1745, a black slave named Papa killed his wife with a blow of an axe on her head and then disappeared. Baraka, a baptized Fulbe slave, murdered his wife and then ran away. And they were both slaves of the king. Baraka was caught a few months later and interrogated. And he explained that he had come back from work in town and asked his wife for food. She went on babbling and smoking her pipe. He hit her on the head with a log and then ran away, and some Indians helped him cross the river. His defense was that his wife had a stick between her legs, and he was afraid that she would hit him with it. and Baraka was sentenced to be hanged in the public square in town. His body was to remain hanging there for 24 hours to serve as an example. Now, warfare took its toll upon the slave population, and especially the adult males. And Beneville's disastrous war against the Chickasaw Indians was costly in slave lives. And aside from those used as cannon fodder, many were conscripted to load and unload ships, to row the troops upriver, and to build fortifications in remote frontier areas. In April 1736, 140 Africans were both slaves and free, were enlisted for the service in this war, and slaves were promised freedom for risking their lives. And during the same month, another company of 45 armed blacks led by free black officers was formed. By 1739, Beneville was commanding 270 blacks, including 50 Negroes libres. And despite the heavy toll that the war took on adult male slaves, Ordinator Solomon complained that his advice that more white colonists should be sent to the front, and sparing the blacks who were more valuable was not followed. Yeah, because the whites wasn't going to do the slave labor. The military decided that they would get more service from blacks than from the white settlers, and Beneville ordered 35 of the king's slaves to accompany the troops of the garrisons to help construct the fort on the St. Francis River. Now, Solomon wrote, they conscripted 1/5 of the colonists' Negroes, which not only caused a great loss to the settlers, but can also be very costly to the king. And there is no reason to doubt that some of these black will perish, and I am convinced that they will be held until the end of the expedition. And although M. de Benneville has promised that they would be returned as soon as the boats arrived to the entry port. Now, the conscripted black laborers suffered more heavily mortality because of the overwork and mistreatment and neglect, and these who survived were reportedly greatly reduced in value because of the fatigue. And Francis Tropignier reported that one of the slaves returned in such poor condition that he had to be brought to the king's hospital. One slave, who was drafted into the army, was kept in the city loading vessels and exposed to all prevalent diseases. He was then sent to Point Capet, where he died without receiving medical attention, and the surgeon reached him for the few moments after his death. Another slave drafted for service in the Chickasaw Wars died and was buried at Point Capet on his way back to the front. And a slave of Dalcourt arrived at his master's estate hardly able to stand and died shortly thereafter of dysentery contracted at Fort St. Francis. Now, 3 more Dalcourt slaves died during the expedition, and another died at Natchez. And Chaperone reported that his 2 Negroes who had returned from the Chickasaw campaign were both ill with inflammation of the lungs, and one of them was not expected to survive the 2-fold consequences of bad food and exhaustive floggings by the troops with whom he had served. Now, some slaves were rented by private contractors to row up the Mississippi River to Illinois country, and the work was backbreaking and dangerous. And when slaves were rented to go to the Illinois country to get flour, the masters assumed responsibility for natural death only. And a slave named Jacob, hired to Benvenue and Mathurin for a trip to Illinois, was abducted by the Indians, and Mathurin was killed, but Benvenue completed his trip. Now, the birth rate among the slaves seems to have remained consistently high, and in 1741, Solomon wrote that no new slaves had been introduced into the colony for the past 12 years, and that the colonists saw with regret that their slaves were beginning to get old and were dying every day. He wrote, this species survives almost entirely by procreation, which has taken place, and in effect, almost among the approximately 4,000 blacks of all types and ages, 2/3 are Creole, and that is the difference between this country and the French West Indies. French West Indies islands where there are very little natural reproduction among slaves. And it is certain that if the cargo of 250 blacks, adult male and women, would come here every year, little by little, the result would be a very considerable quantity of slaves in few years. If we accept Solomon's figures that the slave population had increased from 3,600 to 4,000 between 1732 to 1741, but only 1,320 African slaves remained from the 5,790 Africans imported between 1719 and 1731. The slave population had fallen by 3,600 by 1732, a decline of 63% during the 13th year since the trade began. But while the overall slave population increased between 1732 and 1741, there was a 37% decline among Africans during the same period. This population loss was surely due overwhelmingly to mortality through an undeterminable number of Africans though an undeterminable number of Africans ran away and were not recaptured, and some slaves were freed, and few African slaves could have been exported from Louisiana. And aside from the fact that the export slaves was illegal, the demand for slaves in the colony could best be described as desperate. However, by 1741, 2,680 slaves were Creoles, and a young population born in and acclimated to Louisiana with an even sex ratio. And by 1746, it was estimated that there were 4,730 black slaves in all of Louisiana. And if we subtract the 190 slaves brought from Senegambia by Dubreuil and Dalcourt, we find a natural increase of 540 slaves. And this is credible. This is a credible figure. And since these 5 years were exponentially peaceful, encompassing the end of the Chickasaw Wars and the beginning of King George's War, mortality was probably relatively low and births relatively high. Now, although the white population had substantial increase in 1746, French settlements throughout Louisiana were estimated to be predominantly black, and New Orleans was overwhelmingly black. And aside from the approximately 900 troops stationed in the colony and about 20 convict laborers at Belize, the population of the various settlements was estimated at 4,730 blacks and 3,200 whites. Now, there are no censuses, and not even estimated censuses, for the balance of French rule, and renewed warfare took its toll, and once again, on the slave population. And in 1748, as King George's War came to an end, Governor Vaudreuil reported that more than 300 blacks had died during the previous 2 years because of a lack of woolen cloth and covers to protect themselves at bad weather. The stresses put on Louisiana's population by this war was revealed in a murder investigated by the Superior Council. And in early 1748, as King George's War was coming to a close, a French soldier was murdered by a young slave in his early 20s. Under interrogation, the accused slave stated that he was named Charlotte by Requette, and his master and Kikaruku by his parents and the other blacks. Now, although he was a Creole, he was not baptized, and he identified his nation as the Conido. Now, both his parents were Requette slaves. His father, Baptiste, squared lumber, Baptiste, his father, Baptiste, squared lumber at the mill, and his mother, Marie, worked at the Requette estate. He had 6 siblings, 4 sisters and 2 brothers, and all but 2 had been sold to neighboring planters by Requette. Now, one of his sisters had her ears cut off for running away, and Kakaruku was not killed by the other slaves because he was touchy, and the least thing anyone said to him threw him into a rage, and though he had never committed a crime before. It is clear from the testimony that this murder involved the struggle over food and hunting rights. Now, the slaves had little to eat, and their lunch consisted of potatoes. which were they roasted over a fire. And the murdered soldier was known by the young slaves belonging to Dubriel as Petit Flichy, little arrow. And he hunted and fished every day to feed his mother. Now Flichy met his end by hunting in the wrong place. And the Requette slaves had traps in the woods for catching starlings, which they stoned as they flew under the trap. And Fleechy came into the Requette woodlands and started shooting the birds in the traps. He had recruited 2 young Dubriel slaves to help him pick up the starlings, Francois dit Cupidon, and a Requette slave yelled at him twice, saying, "Hey you, leave our traps alone, and why are you firing under our traps?" Now the soldier replied, "It is that they belong to you. Is it that they belong to you, not to M. Requette?" And continued to fire under their traps. Now the slaves went to lunch, and when they returned, they found the French soldier fatally wounded by stab wounds in several parts of his body. And he asked them for water, but his mouth was so badly cut that he could not hold it. Now the slaves were afraid to touch him, and they called Busherman, a white neighbor, to assist Fleechy. Now Basherman testified that the slaves refused to help move him because before the authorities arrived, under the pretext, according to them, that these men must come see him first. And Basherman helped carry him on the door for fear that he might fall. And although the soldier said that he was attacked by a young Negre whom he knew well, he expired before he could identify his assassin. Nevertheless, a knife was found at the scene of the crime that Laurent, Requette's commodore, identified as belonging to Karuku. The authorities found Karuku's bloody shirt and cloak, and he had wounds on his body. And Karuku claimed that the blood came from animals he had caught and denied that the knife belonged to him, and saying that neither he nor the other slaves ever owned knives, but all the other slaves identified the knife as Karuku's. Although Karuku claimed that he had roasted potatoes in Flanton's cabin during lunch, Planton had another story to tell. And he said that Karuku had not dined with him, and that Karuku's mother, who had cooked rice for him, kept calling him to come eat, but he was not there. Karuku arrived just as they were ready to return to the fields, and Planton said to him, "Where did you go while we were eating?" Charlotte answered, "I was in the woods to see if there were any starlings taken from my traps." And noticing that Charlotte's clothes were full of mud, Planton asked him whom he had killed. Now Charlotte answered that he had not killed anyone, and Karuku's mother, noticing that he wore his shirt inside out, said to him, "Hey, fellow, why do you turn your shirt that way?" Karuku did not answer. After they returned to the fields to plant peas, they found the dying Frenchman. Now Charlotte did not go see him, but turned his head from side to side and did not even make 4 strokes of the pickaxe at that time. And Pluton told him several times, "What are you doing? Work then." Now Karuku finally confessed that it was he who killed the French soldier, but he had several traps in the woods that for wildcats and wood rats, which he evidently skinned and sold for cash. And he went to see about his traps in the woods and encountered the Frenchman, whom he described as quite drunk. The Frenchman asked him to pick up the starlings with him, and he refused, saying that he was going to check on his traps. And the Frenchman said to him, "Okay, then go to hell." And he replied, "Why do you swear at me like that, sir?" And the little Frenchman answered, roughly translated, "Go to hell, you guy." And he moved against Karuku with his bayonet, cutting him under his left arm and saying, "You guy, if I see you again, I'll shoot you with my gun." Karuku replied, "Am I not on my land of my master?" And the Frenchman aimed his loaded musket at Karuku, who jumped on him, stabbing him. And at the first blow, he dropped the gun. And Karuku claimed that he acted in self-defense, but he clearly intended to kill his victim. He cut him in the stomach, on his left side, and on the throat. And when the Frenchman bit Karuku's finger, Karuku said, will you let go of my finger? You are cutting my finger." And the Frenchman replied, "No, I will not let go." And to make him let go, Kuruku cut him in the face. And to stop him from screaming, he cut him in the face again, leaving him for dead. And though he was still mourning, Kuruku was sentenced to have his arms and legs broken on the wheel in the public square of New Orleans and on the left facing the sun until he died. His body was to remain there for 24 hours. And however, after receiving all the blows while living, it was ordered that he be secretly strangled. It is clear that Raquette slaves had a strong sense of property protecting their hunting grounds and their traps, which were located, as Kuruku put it, on my land of my master. And clearly, hunting was an essential means for supplementing their meager diet. But they also hunted to obtain cash for buying clothes and other goods. They operated in a money economy, and some of them accumulated significant amounts of property. A theft in the slave's cabin of Jean Puguel, who lived opposite of Cain's Brussels near New Orleans, revealed that 40 livres in treasury notes, ox hides, a mosquito screen made of coarse linen, shirts, a new cap, and a loincloth made of Limburg cloth was stolen. And despite overwork, exposure, and inadequate food, the slaves of French Louisiana managed to survive because they could supplement their food with hunting and fishing, which is still done today. That's still a big hunting and fishing is still a big thing, which I do. And because the slave women of French Louisiana were quite fertile, and few slaves were imported after 1731. Slaves were never introduced to French Louisiana from the French West Indies in significant numbers. And when the Company of the Indies went rule Louisiana, most ships came directly from France. And we have seen that the slave trade ships from Africa to Louisiana stopped off in the islands for refreshment. But the demand for slaves there was so desperate that one cargo destined for Louisiana was seized and sold in the islands, and captains were forced to sell individual slaves in order to obtain supplies. Now, while there was some trade in the 1720s between Louisiana and the French islands, mostly involving small craft, there were never any plans to import slaves from these islands. And during the wars against the Natchez and the Chickasaw, the Crown sent troop and supply ships directly from France to Louisiana. And these ships stopped off in the French West Indies to pick up their return cargo to France. And since few export staples could be found in Louisiana, a few small craft sailed between Louisiana and the French Indies during 1730s. But this traffic was fraught with difficulties. And in 1735, Benneville and Salmon explained that Louisiana was not in a condition to undertake trade voyages with the islands. And the few trade voyages organized from Louisiana had poor results. There were few sailors in Louisiana, and officials in St. Dominique had been informed that there was little hope to trade voyages to Louisiana would be organized from that island. And there were few ships and little money, and the prices of sailors and for food supplies were high. The risk of the sea and the possibility of being seized by Spanish pirates was also discouraged such voyages. And in 1737, the king encouraged this trade by exempting goods carried between Louisiana and the French islands from customs duties for 10 years. Now, in the same year, Benneville and Salmon reported that they feared that the inhabitants of the islands would abandon their trade with Louisiana in disgust, and because of the ships from Martinique heading for Mobile had been taken near Havana, and a ship from St. Dominique broke up on the coast of Louisiana at the Chandelier Islands during the second voyage to Louisiana. The brigantine La Heureuse Etoile was carrying a cargo of mules, rice, and 4 Indian slaves, 3 females and 1 male, from Louisiana to Cape Francois and St. Dominic, And it was seized by the Spanish Coast Guard ship and taken to Spanish San Domingo. where the ship and its cargo was confiscated. Now, Dubriel did, however, import 2 slaves from the French West Indies in 1739. Now, serious obstacles were placed in the path of anyone wishing either to export slaves from the French islands to Louisiana or to immigrate from the French islands to Louisiana with their slaves. And in 1741, Benneville and Salmon sent several enthused reports about 2 brother-in-laws from Martinique, Mercier and Tanton, who had come to Louisiana with 9 or 10 of their slaves, and they brought a plantation, and one of them returned to Martinique to get their families and the rest of their slaves. And they assured that Louisiana officials that over 1,500 small slave owners of Martinique who were being squeezed off their land would follow them. And 2 years later, Mercier and Tanton embarked from France to personally solicit the right to immigrate to Louisiana. And in 1743, officials of Martinique allowed them to bring their families to Louisiana, but not their slaves. And they ruled that no other Martesian would be allowed to immigrate to Louisiana, and that whatever efforts made to contribute to the establishment of Louisiana should not be at the expense of the French islands. Now, even at peacetime, when trade with the French islands increased, exports of slaves from the French West Indies to Louisiana was, in practice, prohibited, and except for the individual slaves who were considered uncontrollable. And in 1752, Louisiana officials were still trying to get permission from Martinicians to immigrate to Louisiana and with their slaves. And in reply to this initiative, an official of Martinique explained just where the shoe pinched. He absolutely opposed the export of slaves from Martinique and asked for a specific order prohibiting their export to Louisiana to back up what he was in fact practicing. And however, he made an interesting exception to this ban. Allow me to observe that there is no inconvenience in permitting the sending of 1 or 2 slaves in each ship when permission is obtained. And we have here many blacks who are bad characters, poisoners, flagrant maroons. We punish them as best as we can, but they are often incorrigible. And even more often, there is not enough proof to sentence them to death. Our prisons are full of this type of blacks who stay there for years and who serve no purpose except to spoil the others. And in Mississippi, the blacks are better controlled by their masters and even more by their fear of the Indians, and often correct themselves when they are removed from their country. It would be sad to forbid this recourse to the inhabitants of these islands. And when the ministers of the Marine wrote in 1708 that the inhabitants of the America in general, French as well as English, do not part with their blacks unless they know that them to be bad and vicious, he knew very well what he was talking about. And chronically ill slaves from the French islands were also sold in Louisiana. A Louisiana settler bought 4 slaves coming from the French islands, and 2 became ill at once and were nursed back to health and were taken back by the vendor, and 1 died of a lung disease. And before he died, he explained that his malady affected his entire nation, and that he had been sold out of Martinique because of his illness. And the settler complained that the inhabitants of St. Dominic and Martinique, but detached from the Negroes and the workshops, but these to send them to be sold in this colony. And thus several small plantations have been ruined by buying several Negroes who die shortly afterwards and become invalids and are but a burden. It is necessary to pass a ruling to prevent frequent surprises by the inhabitants of St. Dominic and Martinique on the Negroes sent here. And furthermore, the settler had paid 3,300 livres, which in letters of exchange was worth 4,950 livres in Martinique. And although substantial numbers of new slaves came neither from Africa nor from the French islands, the slave population among the lower Mississippi River settlement from the mouth of the Mississippi River to Point Capee increased nevertheless, from 3,630 in 1746 to 4,598 in 1763. There was probably natural increase between 1748, when the King George's War ended, and in 1756, when the French and Indian War began to affect lower Louisiana. And thereafter, there was probably natural decline due to the hardships and shortages of war, compensated for by the introduction of new slaves by British traders during the last few years of the French rule. But because of the poverty-stricken condition of many slave owners during these years, it is probably unlikely that more than that of a few hundred slaves were introduced by the British before 1736. Aside from the 190 slaves bought from Senegambia in 1743, the small contingents of slaves brought in from the French West Indies mainly between 1748 and 1756, and several hundred slaves, almost surely Africans, brought in by British traders during the last years of the French-Indian War, the slave population survived because of the fertility of the women, and the sexual imbalance must have evened out because of high mortality among male slaves during the Chickasaw Wars, and because of the coming of the age of the first generation Creoles. The fertility rate among slave women, not several slaves. The fertility rate among slave women in French Louisiana was reasonably high. And it is instructive to compare the child-woman ratios during the French period with child-woman ratios among African and Creole slave women during the Spanish period. At the Point Capee post between 1771 and 1802, African women had a child-women ratio of 0.313. And though it must be kept in mind that some of these women had recently arrived from Africa, where they were separated from their small children. And however, the child-woman ratio on available inventories of most estates of French Louisiana compare favorably with the child-woman ratio of 0.665 among Creole slave women of Point Capee during the Spanish period. And apparently, fertility was higher among slave women in French Louisiana than in Spanish Louisiana. And despite the deprivations of frequent warfare and famine, and despite the fact that during the early decades the mothers were overwhelmingly Africans, this contrast must be attributed to the scrupulous protection of the slave family during the French period, and to the deterioration of the protection of the slave family under the Spanish rule when the African slave trade revived. Now, during the last years of French rule, warfare and insecurity put pressure on the slave population. And Nicolas Chauvin de Lafreniere, Attorney General of Louisiana, was an elite Creole and one of the most vehement opponents of the transfer of Spanish rule. He was accused of being one of the two major conspirators involved in the expulsion of the first Spanish governor, and Antonio de Douaulay. Lafreniere was convicted and shot by a firing squad on October 25th of 1769. And on March 18th of 1769, probably to prevent the confiscation of the property, the Lafreniere estate and indigo plantation at Chapatulas was sold to another Lafreniere, probably the accused's brother, for the modest sum of 10,000 livres. And the sale included land, belongings, improvements, 31 slaves, and cattle. And further details of the inventory reflect the slave population under stress. And despite an uneven sex ratio and a high birth rate, both debts and sales of slaves during the previous 10 years were recorded and 7 slaves had died in 1759, and probably because of wartime shortages, and 4 had died between 1760 and 1769. Now, 10 slaves under the age of 11 had been born since 1759, and 6 slaves were sold in 1760. Although the sex ratio was even, no children were inventoried apart from both parents, and scrupulous attention was paid to the slave family, and the fertility rate was high, a child-woman ratio of 1.000, and this population was at risk. And aside from the fact that there had been 11 deaths and 10 births during the previous decade, and 6 slaves had been sold and non-purchased, and the skewed age structure among the inventory slaves did not bode well for the plantation's future. Debts and slaves had stripped the estate of mature adults. And while elderly men married to young women continued to father children, the life expectancy of the elderly slaves was not great. And let me mark that shit. Let me mark that shit. What it was, the elderly was, they was using the elderly men to, and while elderly men married to young women continued to father the children, the life expectancy of the elderly slaves was not great, and deaths among the elderly could probably be compensated for by births over the ensuing years. The Prevost estate, an indigo plantation fronting Lake Borgne, south of New Orleans, was inventoried the same year, and Jean-Baptiste Prevost administered the affairs of the Company of the Indies in Louisiana, and he was wealthy and secure. And the Prevost estate, man, I've heard that name. I've heard that name before. The Prevost estate contrasted sharply with the Lafreniere estate. And though the age structure was also badly skewed, rather than the normal pyramid shape with large numbers of children at the bottom and the gradual decrease in numbers of advancing age, there were 18 children under age 15 and 28 adults between the age of 50 and 54 and 26 over the age of 44. And unlike the Lafreniere estate, the sex ratio on the Prevost estate was uneven, a sex ratio of 170 or 1.7 males for each female. Its age structure was a mirror image of the Lafreniere estate, and males outnumbered females, especially in the mature years, and mature men were undoubtedly purchased from planters in distress as well as from British slave traders. A child-woman ratio was 0.500, half of that of the Lafreniere estate, and the Prevost estate was geared for production, not procreation. It relied upon purchasing young men and did not stress fertility among women, a pattern that became generalized under Spanish rule when African slaves began to be imported in large numbers. Now, one of the most widespread common organizing principles of West African societies is revenge for the elders stemming from the ancestors' worship, and certainly a highly transportable culture material. Many of the Africans in French Louisiana who survived the Atlantic slave trade and the deprivations of warfare and famine during their first few decades in the colony lived to be quite old, and both of these inventories reflect the high survival rate among the elderly, many of whom were married couples, all of them with little doubt old Africans, and evidently only the strong survived the Atlantic crossing and the ravages of brutalizing labor, warfare, and hunger on the Louisiana frontier. These survivors lived long and productive lives, and they were only 3 generations of slaves brought into Louisiana and born during the last period of the French rule. The presence of African parents and grandparents living on the same estate as their Creole descendants throughout the French colonial period further Africanized Louisiana Creole culture. And African slaves had great power and influence over their children and grandchildren. The strategic position of the old Africans is shown in these two slave inventories dating from 1769 and 6 years after France abandoned Louisiana to Spain. In a population of 31 slaves in the Lafreniere estate, there were only 6 adults between the ages of 15 and 45, and 5 of them were women, 2 of whom were married to much older men. And there were 12 children under the age 15 and 7 men and 4 women over the age 45. A slave who was 50 years old in 1769 had been born in 1719, and so we can safely assume that the 8 slaves aged 50 and older were Africans. Barbara, the coachman, aged 50, and his 25-year-old wife were the parents of 2 children, ages 2 and 10, and Grand Colos, age 50, and his wife, Daogu, age 45, and probably also an African, were parents of 5 children, aged 18, 10, 6, 4, and 2, and another daughter had died. Cesar, age 60, and his wife Catherine, age 58, had 2 daughters and 6 grandchildren on their estate. Mongo, age 75, and Jalase, his wife, age 75, had a 35-year-old son who was single and lived on the estate. Now, Boya, maybe it's Boayu, age 70, and Fouchinet, his wife, age 25. Ooh, that's that's some Shannon Sharp shit. Age 25, had a 10-year-old son. But another of Boyayu's sons, Yaku, was sold in 1759, along with Yaku's daughter, Mariana, and Mariana's daughter, Louise. Thus, Boyayu married a 15-year-old girl and had a son by her. The same year, his son, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter were sold. And all the fathers of this estate were Africans. 8 of the Lafreniere slaves lived on the same estate with both of their African parents, and 6 slaves with both of their African grandparents, and 3 slave children had African fathers and much younger mothers, almost certainly Creole. We're going to get to this one last paragraph, which will be, we'll end it on the next page. Let me see. Yeah, we'll stop on the next page at the end of the paragraph. The cultural impact of the Africans brought to Louisiana during the French slave trade is engraved upon the very structure of language as well as in the history of its use. The Louisiana Creole language was created by the African slaves brought to Louisiana and by their Creole children. It belongs to a special language group, and the Atlantic Creoles, which are languages created by African slaves brought to the Americas. And these languages are markedly similar in grammatical structure and in pronunciation and in literal translations of African idioms. And though the vocabulary is largely that of the language of the respective European colonizers, Morris F. Goodman's pioneering comparative study of French-based Creoles is historically oriented, suggesting that the study of the origin of the development of these languages can best be depart from the thorough investigation into the history of the slave trade, European colonization, and culture and language contexts. And such a study should give insight into how new languages develop and change. More recently, Derek Bickerton has minimized the importance of African language structures and forms of expression upon the creation of the Atlantic Creole languages, claiming that the grammatical similarities found in these languages derive from universal and linguistics bioprograms in the human brain. And Bickerton's thesis has been effectively challenged by other specialists in sociolinguistics and creolistics. And John Home has demonstrated the marked influence of African languages upon pronunciations and clocking, that is, the translation of idioms, word for word, from one language to another, as well as upon grammatical structure that cannot be explained by universals or bioprograms, concluding that these languages arise among speakers of partially similar African languages shit. My bad. I missed some stuff. As well as upon grammatical structure that cannot be explained by universals or bioprograms, concluding that these languages arose among speakers of partially similar African languages learning partially similar European languages under partially similar social conditions. Yeah, that was messing me up. My bad. The most convincing and exciting work in linguistics is coming from Creolists who emphasize the importance of contact among peoples who speak different languages, and therefore their studies of the development of languages is rooted in the history of human contact, migration, and interaction. We'll stop there. We shall stop there. And that was part 15. That was part 15. Part 15 of Africans in Colonial Louisiana by Miss GWENDOLYN MIDLO Hall. Miss GWENDOLYN MIDLO Hall. And we are more than halfway through chapter 6 now. We'll keep rowing and keep on pushing so we can see. We don't have that many pages left till we get to, I could keep going. I could keep going since I don't have any Pokemon cards. Since I don't play that shit. I could keep going to 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll stop there. I'll stop there. Suzette. Yeah, we'll come back tomorrow. We'll come back tomorrow in the next part 14 and finish off chapter 6. Yeah, we'll finish off chapter 6 and get ready to start chapter 7. Bas de Fleuve. Bas de Fleuve. The Creole slaves adapt to the cypress swamps. Which we got them all around where I'm at right now. Cypress knees. You better not fall on one of them cypress knees. Bust you up. Allegedly, Brian can fall on one of them cypress knees, get busted up. Maybe I'll find a Pokemon out there in them cypress swamps. But there was a lot going on in that part. They were trying to justify, or what it seemed like, justify the reason that they weren't taking slaves because of the high procreation, but because of the debts between the wars that they were having, and they said the famine and other things, that the older the older or elders who were surviving longer than the young folk was taking on the younger wives. They were taking on the younger wives. Old men with young women. Old men with young women, man. I wonder if that's where they get that thing where they say, old men gonna give you worms. But it is what it is. Hey, they had to do what they had to do in that case. They weren't really getting much slaves in. So the only thing they could do was try to promote the procreation of new slaves and have the slaves from in-house instead of exporting them in. And they damn sure wasn't gonna import no shit. They was tired of importing things from the West Indies based off of what the West Indies, like Saint Dominic, which became Haiti, was producing. Well, it's not that they were producing bad things, but they were tired. They wanted to get rid of all the poisoners, the people who weren't really good slaves to them. The people who played big parts in an insurrection. And when those slaves from Haiti would get to Louisiana, then they would start talking the things that maybe Mackendale or maybe Toussaint was talking, and the insurrections were starting and insurrections were happening. The revolution, they didn't want those type of things to happen. They didn't want the spread. You know how they say you got to cut the cancer out before it spreads. So to them, Mackendale and Toussaint and the Haitians that were coming over to Louisiana was the spread of that cancer that they didn't want to continue on into the Americas. So, hey, they was cutting off a lot of that back and forth between them. They did keep more back and forth between Saint Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Saint Dominic, but they already had it was already great insurrections and stuff that was going on between them. So, but yeah, we'll continue. We'll continue to see what Miss Miss Gwendolyn Midlo Hall has to say. I think that the next book, The Black Indians, is going to go more into depth to what I really think it is. I don't think it was that many Africans here, and for the number of slaves they had, man, it wasn't just when people talk about the slave trade, they're not talking about no 5,000 slaves. And for them to have 5,000 slaves, they had more than that, had to have more slaves than that for Louisiana to become what it is and what it was at that time. So I think the Black Indians is going to play a big part in because they did have Indian slaves. They did have Indian slaves. The Indians did mingle and mix with the so-called African slaves. But I think majority of them slaves, it probably was already here. Majority of them slaves was already here, and it was taken out of the different Indian nations due to the Indian wars that they were having. Some with the Chickasaw, some with the Natchez, the Illinois Indians, the Opelousas Indians, Choctaw, and other ones that they might have been fighting against, and even individual Indian nations was warring against each other due to them trying to be friends with the Europeans, whether it be the French or the Spanish at that time. So, but they didn't like the Indian slaves. They didn't like the Indian slaves because they weren't as eager to work or as docile as the so-called African slaves were, as they said. Oh man. Hey, but it is what it is. Hey, it is what it is. We succeeded, man. We had breath to breathe, so I had all I need to succeed, and we succeeded with reading in part 14. Part 14. So now let's go ahead and we worked our body, we worked our mind. Let's work our body one last time, and then we can go ahead and get out of here. I appreciate everybody that like, comment, subscribe, even though your comments sucked. Allegedly, Brian. Your comments sucked, but yeah, I appreciate the comment. All those little things help the channel to grow, whether it be a good comment, stupid comment, like, dislike, all those things help the channel to grow. And that's definitely what we're trying to do. Help the channel to grow. Man. Ooh, I'm tired, yeah. All right, let's get this out the way, man. 50 knees. 50 knees. Get your ass up and do something, man. Hey, stop being fat all your life. You never know, man. You never know when you're going to need it. 50 knees. 50 knees, if you please. Let's rock them. 50 knees, and we'll do 25 of the other, 25 of the other things. 50 with the 50. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50. Whew. That was 50. Let's get it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Whoo-wee. 15 more. 15 more. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, holy, 18, 19, 20, 5 more, 21, 2, 3, 4, 25. Shoulder burn. 50 with the 50. So, hey, we've completed the task. We've completed the task. Succeeded. Succession. That's what we came to do, succeed. Try to see what we can learn from this. What can we, what treasures can we unearth? Yeah, I think we're over halfway. Through the book now. We're about halfway at the halfway point. At least for what I'm going to read in the book. This will be book number 28. The 28th book I've assassinated. And we're going to keep working at it. We're going to go ahead and assassinate this sucker. It's definitely a lot, the difference, the difference between the different places, why brings the questions like, okay, if France had control of Haiti and had control of Louisiana as well, even though both places had the code noir that was implemented in both places, why would you leave the families intact? Why not leave the families intact as well? Or in Haiti, why be so, maybe because it's the insurrections, maybe, but why be so heavy-handed in Haiti, St. Martinique, and Guadeloupe, and not be as heavy-handed in Louisiana? And maybe it's just because it was more shit going on in Haiti than it was in Louisiana. Both places had pretty much the same crops, same problems as well. The only difference was I would say maybe the land for sure was different. So therefore, you didn't have as much. It was just more uninhabitable here in Louisiana. Like it's going to go into probably the next one with the cypress swamps. It probably took them a lot longer to navigate and overcome the cypress swamps compared to the fertile land that they had in Haiti. Even though some of it was mountainous and hilly, this and that, the food, from reading in other books, the food would grow, I guess, more effortlessly. It still had to be cultivated, but because of the fertile land,
Sugarcane was grown in abundance. The indigo was some of the best indigo that they came up with. Tobacco was grown there as well. And even though these things were still grown in Louisiana, indigo grew naturally here in Louisiana. This book says sugarcane was sugarcane was and still is a supplement of Louisiana money. Shit, I went and bought me some cane sugar today. Uh, Rice also is a staple, and I don't believe they had rice in Haiti. I have to go back and check it out. I don't think they had rice in Haiti like they had in Louisiana. And the rice, the different type of rice that they had here could be cultivated in the more wetland area. And maybe because all the other shit too, they couldn't get up the Mississippi. Maybe all that shit played roles in it, in why they were maybe more lenient on not separating the families here, you know. But still in all, a strong family structure with having the grandparents, the parents, and the children and grandchildren underneath the same, you know, plantation, you could say, is what from Miss Gwendolyn Midlo Hall helped to uh, establish and perpetuate and grow the Creole language as it had. So, all praises for the family staying together. I think that's what needs to happen anyway. Whether you're on a plantation like they were here in the Africans in Colonial Louisiana, or whether we're here, in America in 2025 on plantations. Shit, I think we still need to have a family structure. I think we're better off together with the family structure than I think we are apart in single parenting. Um, Even though many are involved in the single parenting as well as I am, I still think that we're better off with the family structure from the grandparents on down. From the grandparents to the mother and the child, y'all in the surrounding area, same area where everybody can help each other out. Where lessons that have been learned can be passed down on, where growth is a lot easier to happen. The family love dynamic, as far as, if the parents are busy, then sometimes the grandparents could take over because y'all all are here and y'all have a close knit family. The dependence on each other. Maybe dependence isn't the right word, but being able to depend on each other. I think that is a good thing to have within that family dynamic or nuclear family dynamic. But hey, who am I? I think if it ain't broke, don't fix it, for the most part. But so many people want to reinvent the wheel when it comes to family and family structure. And it's been shown over and over again that the family that has, the family that stays together, really ends a lot better than the family that doesn't. The outcome of the children ends up being a lot better. The end result. They say, call no man blessed, until later on in his life, you want to see how his children grow up, or, how they live after him. I think nowadays the children is growing up without the family structure is growing up way worse. It's way worse. But hey, I'm trying to do my part by rearranging and burning down the plantation in my mind and adding new things to it, being I don't want to say proactive, but making the effort to pick up a book and take control over what I am allowing myself to download, what I'm allowing myself to rebuild, the burnt up plantations that was there, because we all have to do some readjustments to our thought processes. We all have to do maybe a reboot or update to the mainframe of your mind. So, hey, you need to make it happen. You are the only one who can do so. You have to make a choice. You still have a choice, like I had a choice, and I have a choice. And I think that for me, it's my sons. My sons is what gives me the, I want motivation, because I want them to see different. I want them to see different and better. So, working and building up my reading skills is definitely part of it to make me better. Working up and building up my knowledge of, the things around me, so that way people can't tell you lies, is definitely a part of it. If you don't pick it up and read, what they say, you want to hide something from a man, you put in the book, put in the book. Hide it from a negress, put it in the book. And there's a lot of shit in the book that's been hidden from us. And many of us don't like to read, and I was one of them. So, and I'm going to keep pushing and keep assassinating books one after another, pirating on the sea of pages until I can find the treasures that have been, buried, that has been buried and covered up with the lies. It's time to move the lies out the way and unearth the truths. And let's see what it is and what it ain't, and what we can and what we can't. And let's do better than what it was, so it can be better for those that come after. If not for yourself, definitely for those that come after. Hey, so I appreciate everybody once again for stopping by, listening in, checking me out, man. This has been part 15 of Africans in Colonial, Louisiana by Ms. GWENDOLYN MIDLO Hall. We're more than halfway through chapter 6. We'll pick up next time with the end of chapter 6, and we'll finish roaring through that. Like, comment, subscribe, share, tell your people, man, Shalom out here reading shit. We learning shit. We doing shit. We're going to be building shit, planning shit, growing shit. Just trying to come up with some new shit, man. Building, being better. That's the objective. Succeed at little so we can work up to succeeding at great. And let the haters hate, because they ain't going to be able to eat off your plate. They don't even have a plate to eat off of. So it is what it is. Shalom, everybody. I hope y'all have a wonderful night, man. Catch me on the back end, man. If y'all want to, hey, go check out the beginning of the book, chapters 1 through 6. If you're trying to catch up, man, it's in the videos. It's in my videos. You can catch it. Go sit back when you have time. Everyone's about an hour read. Is a 15 parts, so yes, 14 more parts you got, man. So hopefully I stop bullshitting and get on this kids hour, this children hour. But we'll have to see, man. I'm about to be reading at the library to the little children, so we're gonna try to make some time for the children hour, because I really need to start this it's collection. It's a 26 book collection of Desmond Cole and the Ghost Patrol. Desmond Cole and the Ghost Patrol. I really want to start that. Even though I've read some to my boys, but I want to go ahead and start that for the children's hour or the children's corner, so we can at least get something else read besides the slave books or the adult. What's more of adult books? Let's put a little fiction in there and see what's what, man. And we'll keep pushing, one book at a time. One book at a time, one session at a time, one part at a time, man. One page at a time, one chapter at a time, paragraph, sentence at a time, line upon line, here a little, there a little, until we can seek and find what treasures have been left behind for you and for me, so we can rearrange our minds. Man, let's do our thing. We got a job to do. Let's do it. Shalom, everybody. Have a nice night. I'll try to catch y'all in the morning with Rising Scripts, man. Rising Scripts. We're going to try to finish off Judith. So, Shalom. I'm out, baby.